I want to tell you about the morning. I found out that everything I had given my daughter's husband was being used to push me out the door. It started with a voicemail. Not a text, not a conversation, just a voicemail left at 7:14 in the morning while I was still in the shower. My son-in-law's voice, practiced and smooth, the way it always sounded when he'd already decided something and just needed me to hear it. "We've been talking," he said, "and we think it's best if you find your own place. The boys are getting older. They need the space. You understand." I stood there in the hallway in my robe, phone against my ear, listening to that message twice. The second time, I focused on the word we. We've been talking. I wondered when my daughter had become a we that didn't include me. Before we go further, I'd like to know where you're listening from today. Drop your city or state in the comments. It helps me know who I'm talking to. 11 years earlier, I had moved into that house on Caldwell Road in Greensboro, North Carolina, because my daughter asked me to. She didn't suggest it or hint at it. She sat across from me at the kitchen table in the apartment I'd rented since her mother and I split, and she held both my hands and said, "Dad, I need you close. The boys are young. My husband travels. I can't do this alone." She was 31. The twins had just turned 2. I was 63 years old, recently retired from 31 years with the county assessor's office, and I had nowhere particular to be. So I said yes. I sold my furniture. I put the rest in a storage unit on Elm Street that cost me $82 a month for years. I moved into the in-law suite off the back of the house, the one with the separate entrance and the window that faced the oak tree. I told myself it was temporary. The way you tell yourself things that turn out not to be true. My son-in-law traveled for work about 2 weeks out of every month. Medical device sales. He wore good shoes and drove a company car and spoke about revenue targets the way other men spoke about sports. When he was home, we were polite to each other. Not warm, but polite. We shared the grill on Sundays. He called me by my first name, which my daughter seemed to think was a compliment. "He doesn't call anyone by their first name," she told me once. I didn't say what I thought about that. What I did instead was raise those boys. I was the one at the bus stop every afternoon with 2 sets of homework questions in my head before they even climbed the steps. I coached the older twins' flag football team for 3 seasons because nobody else would. I drove the younger one to speech therapy every Tuesday morning for 2 years, sat in the waiting room with a folded newspaper I never actually read, and learned enough about articulation exercises that I could run through them with him at the dinner table without the therapist present. When my daughter got the promotion that came with longer hours, I was the one who made dinner 4 nights a week. Pot roast on Mondays, baked chicken on Wednesdays. Whatever the boys requested on Fridays within reason. That became the rule. I also paid. I am saying that plainly because it matters. My pension came to a little under $3,100 a month. My Social Security added $900 more. I kept $400 for myself, gas, prescriptions, the occasional barber. The rest went into the household. Groceries, utilities, the boys' activity fees, school supplies, 2 rounds of orthodontia for the older twin that the dental insurance didn't fully cover. I never kept a ledger. My daughter never asked me to. We were family. That's what family does. That's what I told myself. The morning of the voicemail, my son-in-law was supposed to be in Atlanta through Thursday. When I walked into the main house to start breakfast the way I had every weekday for years, my daughter was already at the kitchen table, not dressed for work, just sitting, coffee in front of her, both hands wrapped around the mug. She didn't look up when I came in. I said, "Good morning." She said it back, quiet. I asked if she was feeling all right. She said she was fine. I pulled out the skillet, and she still hadn't moved, so I asked if she wanted eggs. "Dad," she said, "did you listen to the message?" I had. I told her I had. She looked at me then. Her face had something on it I hadn't seen in a while. Not guilt exactly. More like the expression people wear when they've convinced themselves that a painful thing is actually reasonable. We've been talking about it for a while, she said. The boys are going to need that room. 8th grade is coming and they need to separate. They've been sharing since birth. I turned the burner off. I set the skillet back down on the stove. The suite has its own entrance, I said. I know, but, she stopped. He thinks it's time. And honestly, Dad, you've been so comfortable here. Maybe it would be good for you too. Your own space, your own schedule. Your own schedule. I had made their schedule for 11 years. I didn't argue. That surprised her, I think. She was watching me like she expected something louder. I just nodded and said I understood, and I went back to my suite, and I sat in the armchair by the window and looked at the oak tree for a long time. The thing about being 63 and deciding to help someone is that you don't think about the exit. You don't ask what happens when they don't need you anymore, or when someone else decides they don't. You just show up. You figure showing up is enough. Maybe that's the mistake, not the showing up. The not asking. I called my old friend Theodore that afternoon. We'd worked in the same office for 12 years and still had lunch twice a month at the diner on Battleground Avenue. I told him enough. The voicemail, the conversation. The way my daughter had said, he thinks before she said anything else. Theodore listened without interrupting, which is what I appreciate about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. You know what I learned too late? He said. When somebody tells you that leaving is for your own good, they've already decided you're gone. The only question is whether you walk or get carried. I stared at the wall. The paint was a color my daughter had chosen. A gray-green she called sage. I had painted that room myself, spent a full Saturday with a roller and drop cloths and a fan in the window. Then I'm walking, I said. I didn't make any decisions that afternoon. I let the week pass. My son-in-law came back from Atlanta on Thursday, and we sat at the same dinner table, and he asked the boys about school and passed the bread without meeting my eyes. My daughter talked about a project at work. The boys argued over the last of the corn. Normal. As though the voicemail hadn't happened. As though we'd all agreed to pretend. That night, after the boys were in bed and the house was quiet, I went to the storage unit. I hadn't been inside it in a few years. The lock was stiff. Inside it smelled like time, cardboard and old wood, and something faintly like my mother's house, which is a smell I can't explain but would know anywhere. I found the filing box in the third stack. I'd been organized my entire career. Receipts, statements, every document I'd ever signed filed by year and category. It took me 40 minutes to find what I was looking for. 11 years of bank statements. The transfers to their joint account. The receipts I'd paid directly, orthodontist, school fees, the plumber I'd called when my son-in-law was in Denver, and the pipe under the kitchen sink gave out. I found the check I'd written when they needed a new HVAC unit the summer of the boy's 5th birthday. $6,000, written on a Tuesday because I had it and they needed it, and I didn't think twice. I sat on a plastic storage bin with a flashlight and went through all of it. I wasn't angry yet, not the hot kind. It was more like the feeling you get when you've been reading a long book and you finally understand what the story has actually been about the whole time. Everything looks different from that point forward. The next morning I called my attorney. He'd handled my retirement planning and the estate paperwork after my mother passed. I told him what was happening. He asked me a few questions, then said, "Tell me about the living arrangement. Was there anything in writing?" There wasn't. "How long have you been contributing financially?" 11 years, I said. "I have every receipt." He was quiet a moment. "Come in," he said. "Bring the box." We met on a Monday. He reviewed everything on his desk, reading glasses low on his nose, turning pages without hurrying. When he finished, he leaned back and looked at me. "You have something here," he said. "Not a slam dunk, but something. Unjust enrichment is a real argument in North Carolina with documentation like this. But beyond the legal question." He paused. Where do you want to live? I hadn't let myself ask that yet. I looked at the framed print on his wall, a watercolor of the Blue Ridge, generic but peaceful. I thought about the oak tree outside my window. I thought about how I'd planted the hydrangeas along the back fence the spring after I moved in, because the fence was ugly and bare. And I thought we'd all be looking at it for a long time. I still was looking at it. Somewhere that's mine, I said. He nodded. Then let's start there. I found the apartment 6 weeks later, a two-bedroom on the second floor of a complex off Wendover Avenue. More space than I needed, but one room for sleeping and one room for the boys when they wanted to visit. The leasing agent showed me the kitchen, and I stood at the counter and looked out the window at the parking lot and thought, I can make this right. I can put things where I want them. Nobody is going to tell me this space isn't mine. I signed the lease on a Wednesday. I didn't mention it at dinner that night. I sat across from my son-in-law and passed the bread and asked the boys about their week. 3 days later, I told my daughter. She was in the laundry room folding towels when I found her. I said I'd found a place. She stopped folding. She turned to look at me like she hadn't expected the sentence to arrive so quickly. Already? She said. You asked me to go, I said. I'm going. She set down the towel. Her voice shifted. We didn't mean right away. We thought maybe by the fall. There's no rush, Dad. There was a voicemail, I said. It seemed like a rush. She started to say something about how I was misunderstanding. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. When she was done, I said, I've been here 11 years. I've been glad to be here. But I'm not going to be asked to leave and then wait around like it didn't happen. She looked at her hands. I said, I'll be out before the end of the month. I started packing that weekend, quietly, steadily, a few boxes a night after dinner. The boys noticed before their parents did. The older twin knocked on my door on a Sunday evening and stood in the doorway with his hands in his hoodie pockets and looked at the boxes stacked against the wall. Are you moving, Grandpa? I am, I said. Because of Dad. I looked at him. He was 13 now. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaws and something entirely his own, in the way he asked a question without flinching. It's just time, I said, that's all. He didn't look like he believed me entirely, but he nodded, like he was giving me the courtesy of the answer. The morning I moved out, my son-in-law was home. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched the last 2 trips to my car. He didn't offer to help. He didn't say anything until I picked up the last box, the one with the framed photos I'd kept on the dresser, and headed for the door. I hope there are no hard feelings, he said. I stopped. I turned around and looked at him the way you look at something you've finally stopped pretending you don't see. I paid for this house to run for 11 years, I said. Your sons know every word of their times tables, because I sat with them at that table 4 nights a week. The HVAC that keeps your family cool every August. I wrote that check. I'm not carrying hard feelings, but I'm not pretending it was nothing either. He didn't say anything after that. I walked out. The apartment smelled like new carpet and fresh paint. I set the boxes down in the living room and stood in the middle of it and breathed. I hadn't lived alone in 11 years. The silence felt enormous. At first, the kind that has weight. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, because I didn't have a couch yet, and I looked at the ceiling and thought about the oak tree and the hydrangeas and the chair at the head of the table that was never actually offered to me, only tolerated. Then I thought, I don't have to think about any of that anymore. The hard part came about 2 weeks later. My daughter called on a Tuesday evening. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when someone has been rehearsing. She said she wanted to talk. I said I was listening. There was a pause, and then she said, He looked at the accounts, Dad. He went back through them. He didn't realize how much you had been contributing. Another pause. I didn't either. Not really. I knew you helped, but I didn't add it up. I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence do its work. That doesn't change what happened, I said finally. I know, she said. I'm not trying to make right. I just. Her voice thinned. I didn't know he was going to send that message without telling me first. He sent it from the airport. I found out the same time you did. That stopped me. I held the phone and looked at the wall across from me, the one I hadn't decided what to put on yet. You're telling me you didn't ask him to do that, I said. No, she said, I didn't. I sat with that for a moment. There's a difference between being let go by your daughter and being let go by a man who decided he was done tolerating you while he was sitting in the Delta terminal in Atlanta. Both things hurt, but they don't hurt the same way. I'm not coming back, I said. I'm not asking you to, she said quietly. But I'd like to still be your father, I said, if that's something you want. She was crying by then. Not loudly, just that wet, careful kind that people do when they're trying to hold it together. Of course I want that, she said. Dad, of course I do. We didn't fix everything on that phone call. You can't. 11 years of assuming and not saying and letting things go because the alternative seemed too complicated. You don't untangle that in 30 minutes on a Tuesday night. But something shifted. The kind of shift that makes the next conversation possible, even if it doesn't make it easy. My son-in-law didn't call. I didn't expect him to. The boys came over on a Saturday 3 weeks after I moved in. I had picked up a card table and 4 folding chairs because the real furniture hadn't arrived yet, and we ate pizza on paper plates and played cards for 2 hours. The younger twin won at every game and was gracious about it in that particular way of his, announcing his victories quietly and immediately offering to deal again. The older one asked me halfway through the evening, while his brother was in the bathroom, if I was okay. I'm better than okay, I said. He studied me the way young people study adults when they're trying to figure out if they're being told the truth. Then he nodded and picked up his cards. I started going to my church's Thursday morning men's group again. I dropped it when I moved in with my daughter. Too many competing schedules. Not enough time. Now I had time. I sat in the circle in the fellowship hall with men in their 50s and 60s and 70s and listened and talked and sometimes just drank bad coffee in a folding chair and was glad to be there. One of the men, Herschel, 72 years old, retired postal worker, said something one morning that I wrote down when I got home. He said, "You can love somebody completely and still refuse to disappear for them." I kept that on a note card on my refrigerator for months. The furniture came in the second week of November. A proper couch, this time, deep and solid, the kind I had always wanted and never bought because there was always some other thing the money needed to do. I put it facing the window and spent the first Saturday evening sitting on it reading without anyone needing anything from me. Sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. My daughter and I have dinner together on the first Sunday of every month now. We meet at a restaurant halfway between us. Neutral ground, nothing too loud. We talk about the boys, about her job, about the small, ordinary things that make up a life. We are relearning how to be in each other's company without the weight of everything we didn't say. It takes time. We're taking it. My son-in-law and I are not at dinner. That is a line we have both drawn without discussing it, which may be the most honest thing we have ever communicated. The last thing I want to say is this. I spent 11 years making myself useful so I could stay. I thought that was love. And some of it was fear, disguised as generosity. The fear that if I ever stopped being needed, I would stop being wanted. It took a voicemail from an airport to make me see that I had been building my value on someone else's terms for so long that I had forgotten I was allowed to have my own. I have a kitchen now, where I decide what gets cooked and when. I have a chair at a table that belongs to me. I have 2 grandsons who come over on Saturdays and eat pizza and win at cards and ask me if I'm okay. I am. If you've ever made yourself smaller, trying to earn a place you deserve to have, simply because you are who you are, I hope this story finds you where you need it most. You do not have to earn dignity. You just have to decide you're done living without it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from. Every voice in this community matters. I'll see you in the next one.